Great, thank you. Good morning. Well, actually, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Phoenix Smith. I'm a senior marketing analyst at SANDAG, and I'm here to tell you really quickly about how we're celebrating Bike Month this year. So Bike Anywhere Week is hosted by the San Diego Association of Governments, or SANDAG, and we are the region's long-term planning agency made up of representatives from all 18 cities and the county. SANDAG is responsible for creating the long-term vision for the San Diego region. And through our iCommute program, we normally host an annual Bike to Work Day event. iCommute encourages transportation alternatives to help reduce traffic congestion and greenhouse gas emissions. In an effort to keep everybody safe this year, we shifted gears for 2021 with the Bike Anywhere Week, and we created a combination of self-guided bike activities and virtual events to encourage people to get out and ride safely. So go by bike to work, school, the store, the beach, or just around your neighborhood. We hope you'll explore your community and discover why San Diego County is one of the best places in the country to go by bike. We're encouraging everyone to take our pledge to replace a car trip with a bike ride and go by bike all week. So if you haven't already, please take the pledge at icommutesd.com/bikeanywhere. And remember, you must pledge to be eligible for your free t-shirt. The Bike Anywhere t-shirt is available for pickup at 10 locations throughout the county through this Saturday. And when you pick up your shirt, make sure to bring your confirmation email to scan, wear a mask, and consider biking. Make sure to check our Google Map for business hours since they vary. So thanks to our partners, we've got some really great contests for you to enter this week. You can share a selfie in your SANDAG Bike Anywhere t-shirt for a chance to win a spot in the Pedal Ahead electric bike program, plus a safety gear package, courtesy of Rider Safety Visibility. You can log your bike trips on Love to Ride during Bike Anywhere Week now through Saturday. And each bike trip that you log is an entry to win a new bike valued at $500, courtesy of the San Diego Bicycle Club, bike shop gift cards, restaurant gift cards, commuter backpacks, and other great prizes. And finally, play REI Bike Anywhere Bingo all of this week. Turn in your completed bingo card through Saturday for a chance to win a new bike and other great prizes from REI. So there are a lot of great options to participate this week. You can take a self-guided bike tour and explore the region, go by bike on a shared street, or join a virtual live class like this one to learn new biking skills. We just added 2 new virtual events to our lineup. So tomorrow, REI is going to host a Fix-a-Flat clinic at 6 p.m. And we're also organizing a cross-border bike workshop on Friday at 5 p.m. For more details and a full list of Bike Anywhere Week activities, visit icommutesd.com/bikeanywhere. And be sure to follow SANDAG on social media for the latest updates. All right, that's it from me, Kevin. I'll hand it back over to you and we can get started. Thanks.
Hi folks, welcome. Kevin is going to unmute himself and then we'll dive into this class about basic bike maintenance.
You know, the second draft is always better than the first, right? So that's what I was doing. I was just getting all the shakes out. And now I'm ready to go. Hi, I'm Mr. Kevin. I'm with the San Diego County Bicycle Coalition. And thank you, Phoenix, for having us. And by us, I also mean bike mechanic extraordinaire, Sylvie. We are going to talk about bike maintenance stuff today. We teach all kinds of different classes about all kinds of different stuff, but today we wanted to focus on the bike itself. So in order to do that, I have to make sure we're all on the same page as far as vocabulary goes. So let's start there. What we're talking about when we're talking about bike maintenance stuff is not how to rebuild a bicycle, not how to, break it down and build it back up from scratch, nothing crazy. In fact, a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today doesn't even require any tools at all. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about today is essentially just routine bike maintenance. So the things that you check literally every single time before you start riding your bicycle. Now, if you ride a lot, sometimes this is stuff that gets left by the wayside. My bike worked fine yesterday. Why would I check it again today? Well, here are the reasons why, and here are the things that you can check. You want to make sure to do this literally every single time before you ride the bike, no matter how short or long of a ride it is. We've got a mnemonic device we use to help remember the things that we're supposed to check. It is as follows. A stands for air. B stands for brakes. C stands for chain, but also crank, cassette, cog, and clothing. Quick stands for quick release, and check is the overall check of the bicycle. So this is called the ABC quick check. A for air, B for brakes, C for chain. Quick is for the fact that it's a pretty quick check, but also we check the quick releases and then we check our check. So we quick check and then we check our quick check. Makes sense to me. So starting at the beginning, A for air. Here's a couple of the words you may hear us use, and they're the words that you should know. Squeeze. And squeeze goes along with my favorite word, which is scooshy. Squeeze the tire, make sure the tire isn't scooshy. If your tire is very soft and very scooshy, that's probably a problem. PSI is a number that's probably written on the inside wall of the tire or the outside wall of the tire. Sometimes it's in paint and sometimes it's imprinted on the side of the tire. But that PSI is going to be a range. And so if you know what the range is as far as the PSI goes, then you're better able to pump up the tire to what they recommend. As long as it's not scooshy, you're probably okay. And if you had a bike pump that didn't show what the numbers were, that's okay. But if you have a bike pump like Sylvie has, a floor pump, it probably will show what the numbers are. And then it's your goal to fit the PSI in between those two numbers. Some people like it a little higher, some people like it a little lower. There's some reasons for both that we'll go into in just a little bit. The other thing that's nice about this type of floor pump is it's got a couple different valve attachments. Some bikes have Presta style valves, some have Schrader. She's got both types on that bike pump. And in that way, it adapts to both types of valves that you can see on different types of bike tubes. One of those looks like what you see on a car, and the other that's Presta, and then Schrader, I'm sorry, yeah, I got it backwards. Schrader is the type that you see on a car, and you can fill up at a gas station on your bike, but don't ever do that. And then Presta is the thinner type. It's got some threads at both the top and the bottom that help lock it down and help prevent air from coming out. And there's benefits and downsides to both that we'll talk about in just a second. So that's A for air. B stands for brakes. Here's an example of a rubber pad that rubs on the rim of a brake. That's in order to make the wheel stop moving. That's a pretty common type. There's also disc style brakes, and that's a type that makes it so that the wheel stops moving in the same way that the car brake works. It's a piece of metal on metal, and that's attached to the wheel. The things that you want to look at as far as vocabulary goes are the brake levers. Those are the things you find on your handlebars. You're going to definitely take close attention to how those feel in your hands, and we'll talk about what feels good and what doesn't. They're attached to the handlebars, know where those are and how they work. The brake pads are the things that rub on the part of the wheel that makes the brake stop. And the part of the bike wheel that makes the brake stop is the rim. That's the only place the brake should be interacting with. And we'll talk about why that's a good idea a little bit later on. And then the cables specifically are the thing that goes from the levers that are attached to the handlebars all the way down to where the pads are. And so when you pull on the lever, that pulls on the cable and that pulls on the brake. The arm bone's connected to the shoulder bone and so on and so forth. So lever, handlebars, pads, rim, and cables are our vocab words in regards to brakes. C stands for, does everybody remember? It's the chain. Also crank and cassette and cog and clothing. So here's some examples of what a good-looking setup looks like and what a not-so-good-looking setup looks like. I'll leave it to you to guess which one is which. But as far as checking as what it's supposed to look like, checking to see if there will be a problem later on, rust is something obviously to look for. We're looking for nice and shiny metal, not dull and rusty metal. Grease is something that we're going to be talking about. Lubrication is definitely something that we're going to be talking about. And you want the chain There's some grease on Sylvie's finger right there. And you want the chain to be soft. Now, soft is sort of a weird word to use in conjunction with a piece of metal, but it's a bunch of pieces of metal all stuck together, and they need to move in a way that's soft. If they move in a way that's crunchy or hard, if they're not wiggling in a way that's smooth, then that's something to look at. So pedal the pedals, watch the chain move, listen for crunchy sounds. And if you are going to touch that chain, which you absolutely can, it won't hurt you, you get a little bit of that aforementioned grease. And when you do touch it, you're looking for it to, not be too crunchy. You want it to be soft, and we'll go into more detail about how that's supposed to look in just a little bit. We'll also be talking about gears. So if you're not excited yet, get excited. Hooray. Okay, so that's A, B, and C. Quick is for the fact that it's a quick check, but also for the fact that we're going to look at the quick releases on the bike. There's a few of them. There's there's probably one on your front wheel. If you had like a beach cruiser or something like that, then you probably wouldn't see the quick release, but it's a pretty common thing to see on the front wheel. You'll oftentimes see it on the back wheel as well, and sometimes you'll see it on the seat of the bicycle, as well as a few other parts, but those are the three most common places to see it. We're going to talk about the skewer, which is the part that goes through the axle of the bicycle wheel. The hub is another part that we'll talk about. There's Sylvie showing us the skewer. It's a piece of metal. And then the seat post is also something that we'll talk about. Now, if your seat post has a quick release on it, it's important to keep it tight, because if it's loose, the seat could adjust without you knowing that it's being adjusted, and that would be bad. And if you don't have a quick release, knowing how to adjust that seat is a good thing. Probably once your legs stop getting any longer than they already are now, once it's at a good place, you're not going to move it too often. But there are reasons why you could, and so we'll talk about some of those. And finally is the check, the overall check of the bicycle. This is my favorite part, and it's the most fun, I would argue. The best way I know of to do an overall check of the bicycle is to stand behind the bicycle or in front of the bicycle, but stand next to it. Take one hand and put it on the rear of the seat, and take one hand and put it in the middle of the handlebars. Lift the bike up a couple inches off the ground and drop it. Let it fall. It's going to shake. It's going to rattle. Things are going to maybe fly off of the bicycle. That's a bad thing. Go get those things and put it back on. If it bounces a good amount, that's good. That means your tires aren't scooshy. Remember that word? Bouncing is good. If they're nice and firm, then the bike is going to bounce a lot. So that's a way to know that we've got good air in the tires. If the water bottle falls out, now's the time to get it and put it back on. The whole point is to find the problems and address them before we start riding, as opposed to when we're already riding. And that's the best way that I know of to do it, is to simulate what it's like to have the bike be ridden, but when you're not riding it. That makes sense, right? I think that makes sense. Okay. So we're dropping it, we're shaking it, and we're making sure nothing's loose. Before I go any further, there's a different version of this information, which is, as much as this is the short version of the short class, there's the little tiny 5-minute video. That's something that you can find on the Bike Coalition's webpage. And that's something that if you had the bike right in front of you and you just wanted to get to the most relevant parts, then there's ways to find stuff on our YouTube page. Lots more information, lots more videos. Nice little quote from JFK about how awesome riding a bike is. Look how happy this person is. Look how mad this person is. Bikes are good. Yay. Okay. The other thing I didn't want to forget to mention is Love to Ride. It's a specific platform which you can find on lovetoride.net/San Diego County, and it's free. The best way I know of to get more people to ride is to find people that you like that are also riding, and then you guys motivate each other. It's like peer pressure, but in a good way. So Love to Ride is the way to do that, but virtual. There's points, there's prizes, and it's not competitive. It's just motivational. And that's what I like about it. iCommuteSD.com/event/bike month is all about bike month here in San Diego in May. Lots of information to be found there, including self-guided rides and more virtual classes like the one you're watching now. Okay. All that being said, let's go ahead and look at the bike more close up, because I think that that's fun. let me switch that with that. And there we go. Okay. So let me quit that out. Perfect. So Sylvie, let's start with A for air. So we're squeezing the tire. We're making sure the tire isn't squishy, using two hands, using one hand, whatever it is. You'll be able to tell what's firm and what's not just with your hands. Odds are, if it's firm, it's probably about where you want it. If you don't have a bike pump, this is a perfectly acceptable method to make sure that the PSI is about where you want it. If you do have a bike pump, we're recommending that floor style pump that you see Sylvie using. That's not one that you travel with, but it is one that's great to have at home. So when you're pumping it up, you're looking at the little dial that's on the pump itself, and that's showing you, the needle will move across the dials, and that'll tell you about where the PSI is, or I guess exactly where the PSI is. You want it to be within the range that's printed on the sidewall of the tire. If you go much above that, it is possible to make your tire explode, especially if you're pumping it up at a gas station or a place where there's a motorized pump. Very dangerous. If the tire pressure is too low, it actually makes it easier for you to get a flat, which seems a little counterintuitive, but it's not. If it's too low, it'll squeeze the tube that's inside the tire, and that's a good way to make it go flat. If it's too low and it's soft, then when you roll over glass or thorns, it's easier for the glass or thorn to go into the tube. Nice and firm means it's better able to crush those things underneath you. So that's kind of fun. There's other numbers on the sidewall of the tire, like the size of the tire. There's other numbers on the side of the tire, like the PSI, but in other forms. So bar is one that you'll see. But if you see a number that's like 2-digit number, X, 3-digit number, that's probably the size of the tire. And if you had a problem with it, that'd be a good number to know, to share with the bike mechanic that you're going to talk to, so they'd be better able to replace that tire. What did I miss about air? Sylvie, anything?
I was just looking at this up close and wanted to point out, can y'all see that little kind of splitting that's happening?
Yeah, what is that?
It's just getting old. This is decaying. It'd be a good time to put some new tires on eventually. I also noticed, this is actually someone else's bike, but take a look at what that says.
Ooh, I can't see it. What is it?
It says rotation, and this is flipped. This tire is supposed to spin the opposite way. So someone put this on the wheel backwards. So something else you might see when you look up close and do a kind of investigation.
Maybe they were planning on riding the bike backwards a lot.
Oh, that's a good point.
Okay. So there's lots of information that can be gained from looking at the tires and the sidewall of the tires, including where it's made, who it's made by, how to replace it, what direction it's supposed to go, and what the PSI is. So those are all great things to know. So that's A for air. B stands for brakes. So the best way I know of to check that the brakes are adjusted correctly is similar to the way that, in theory, I guess, I would check that the brakes are adjusted correctly in my car. And that's by, in a car, pushing down on the brake pedal and making sure the wheels stop spinning. Also, pressing down on the brake pedal and making sure I can't push the pedal all the way down to the floor with ease. The brake should start to actuate if I just squeeze it a little bit. And if I squeeze it as hard as I possibly can, it shouldn't necessarily go all the way down to the handlebar. That would be the equivalent of pushing the brake pedal down in a car and having the car not come to a full and complete stop. With it disconnected, you can see it's squeezing and the lever is going all the way to the handlebar. There's no space in between. If the brake is adjusted correctly in a way that is able to stop the bike fast and in a way that is responsive, you'll start to see some slowing down when you just squeeze it a little bit. And if you squeeze it as hard as you possibly can, then it won't go all the way to the handlebars, but it'll get pretty close. About a finger width, I think, is a good rule of thumb for how close you want it to be. Now, there's ways to adjust that. Some of them are easier than others. Barrel adjusters and cable lengths and housing are all fun words that you'd use. There's specific tools that'll help you do that. And there's different types of tools for different types of brakes. All of those things are things that we'll go into more in a more in-depth class focused around maintenance. But knowing that there is a problem with the brakes is the first step, and being able to intelligently say to the person who you're bringing the bike to, I would like to fix this problem, and I know what the problem is. It's this thing here. That can be helpful. So knowing vocabulary is helpful for communicating with other people, and I think that that's a good thing. The other part of the brakes to look at is the pads of the brake. So those are the little pieces of rubber which are rubbing against the rim. So you can see on this example pad how smooth it is on both sides and how smooth it is on the part of the brake that's going to rub against the rim. That's bad. If you look at your brakes, you'll probably notice some scoring, some vertical or horizontal lines which are cut into the rubber of the brake pad. Those are there for a couple different reasons, but one of the reasons is when those are worn down completely, it's definitely time to replace the brake pad. If it's just a single smooth piece of rubber that's rubbing against a rim, then you're going to get some squeaking. It's not going to catch as well. And on a brand new pad like that one Sylvie's showing, it has those scoring marks in it. And that helps with the physics of getting the rubber to rub against the metal in a way that makes the bike stop moving. A pretty common complaint is squeaking. My brakes squeak. They're very loud. And if they do squeak, then there's ways that you can make them not squeak anymore. It's not lubricating the rim of your bicycle. That's dangerous. Don't do that. You can clean the rim of your bicycle. Rubbing alcohol is good for that. Making sure it's completely dry before you start riding again. Lysol pads work great for that as well. The point is any moisture, or the thing to remember, I think, is any moisture that you're putting onto the bicycle, you're getting off completely very quickly because you don't want anything to rust at all. I've also heard of people putting a little bit of sandpaper and scoring. Oh, look at all that grease that came off. And gook. That's no good. I've also heard of people scoring the rubber of the pad with a little bit of sandpaper, making it a little bit rougher so that it can catch on the rim a little bit better. You wouldn't want to grind it down all the way, but if your pads were looking a little bit smooth, making it so that they did have a little bit more of an edge to them to catch the rim wouldn't be a terrible idea. However, there's no substitute for completely replacing a part, but you don't have to do that every single time. Through maintenance, through routine maintenance and checking these things every time before you ride, you're going to catch those problems before they get to the point where you need to replace a part completely, which is a good thing. What else about brakes, Sylvie? Disc brake. Tell us about disc brakes, Sylvie.
So this is what you have on most automobiles and on some mountain bikes and also on some road bikes nowadays. So this is what is going on inside. You have a set of two pads. They squeeze against, let me just get my example.
So this is the same way a car works, is the piece of metal is attached to the wheel and the metal is what's squeezed.
So it's kind of set up like that, so that these two pads will squeeze against the disc and stop it. The disc and the pads have a lot of sensitivity to oils, and people's skin has oil. So you don't want to touch the disc. You don't want to touch the pads unless you have gloves on. This is something that can cause squeaking and also cause the whole disc just to not function at all, because that oil gets inside of these things, contaminates the pads and the disc, and then it can't actually stop effectively. So don't touch them.
Smart. So for brakes, we're looking at the pads, making sure they're not worn down. We're looking at the handlebars, making sure you can't squeeze them too far. I literally would just roll the bike back and forth, squeeze the brakes, make sure that it's stopping the wheels effectively from moving forward. Being able to skid the wheel is a criteria that I've heard from people before. That's not a universal criteria as far as I'm concerned. Having a brake that makes the wheel skid is great, but skidding isn't stopping. You're moving forward if you're skidding, so something to remember. So A stands for air, B stands for brakes, C stands for chain, crank, cassette, cog, clothing, all kinds of C words. As far as clothing goes, tucking your shoelaces in and tucking your pants legs in if you're wearing bell bottoms is a good idea. But when we're looking at the chain, we're looking at a few different things. I like to make sure that as shown in the picture, the chain isn't super rusty. And I like to make sure that the chain works. When I'm talking about the chain working, in a bike with no gears, sorry about that. On a bike with no gears, all the chain does is move the wheel. And on a bike with gears, the chain also moves the wheel. However, it can move it in different ways. And so we're not going to go into super detail on gears, but here's a good visual exercise of how gears work. If you were, well, we'll show you two different ends of the spectrum. How about that? So we're starting on the highest gear, it looks like. And you can, as it's changing, look at how much the derailleur moves. That's kind of fun, right? Okay, so with the chain going from the front chain ring to the back chain ring, we're on the highest gear in the front and we're on the highest gear in the back. I know it's the highest because it's the furthest away from the bicycle. That's what's called highest. So with the piece of cloth in the, put it up at the 12 o'clock position so I can see it just a little bit better. There you go. Okay, perfect. So piece of cloth at 12 o'clock and the pedal is at the 3 o'clock position. So we're going to pedal around one time and we're going to see how many times the tire spins around. 1, 2, 3, 4. So with one rotation, one full rotation of the pedals, 1. The wheel spins 4 times. My best metaphor for this is it's like walking upstairs, not 1 at a time, but 4 at a time. It's harder to do. It takes more effort, but it does get you there faster. So if you're going downhill, if you're going down the stairs, taking 4 stairs at a time is a little bit more reasonable than taking 4 stairs at a time if you're going uphill. If I was going uphill, I'd want it to be easier. I'd want to take the stairs 1 at a time. So what that would look like is with that piece of cloth at the 12 o'clock position, with the pedals at the 3 o'clock position, we're going to pedal 1 time and see how many times the wheel goes around now. Not even 1, just barely half. So with the same number of rotations on the pedal, we're getting less than 1 rotation on the wheel. So now we're taking little tiny steps up that hill as opposed to taking big steps. So each step takes less effort. And so if you're in a position where you're going uphill, you're in a position where your RPMs are such that it makes more sense. You have that variance. So if you put your chain ring just in the middle and you leave it there all the time, I understand that that's the thing that people do. However, my advice to you is just try it out. See what happens when you put it in the highest. See what happens when you put it in the lowest and see how it feels and see how it changes. And then you'll get more comfortable. Shift before you're on the hill as opposed to when you're on the hill. And that's my biggest gear advice. Anything I missed, Sylvie? Cool. So since we're down here, let's talk about the chain, the crank, cassette, and cog. So we're looking for a straight line for the chain from the front to the back and from the back to the front. It's not sagging. It's not flopping down. The derailleur is what's picking up that extra slack. That's that little piece right there. And if that wasn't there, the chain would just hang down. That's a bad thing. So we can touch the chain. It's okay. You're going to get a tiny bit of grease on your fingers, but that's not a bad thing. So we're pinching it. We're spinning and pinching, and we're feeling for grit. We're feeling for it to not be smooth, to not be soft. And we're physically feeling for grip between our fingers, but also the friction between the chain links. You'll be able to tell that there's not enough lubrication there if it doesn't move smoothly. Lubricating the chain is one of the best ways that I know of to sort of get more into, play a more active role in the maintenance of your bicycle. It's incredibly simple, and I highly recommend people start doing this more, as long as they're doing it the right way. What that means is 1 drop essentially on each link of the chain. Now you can, go 1 by 1, but that takes a long time. What Sylvie's doing is instead spinning the chain and slowly and regularly dropping little drops out of that chain lube onto the chain. We're making sure the chain is clean beforehand, and we're making sure the chain is clean after. We're using specific chain lubricant. We're not using olive oil. We're not using egg yolks. We're not using human spit. I don't know. There's a lot of weird things people do with their bikes. Making sure it's clean beforehand, using grease on each one of those links, and then making sure it's clean after is very important. If you leave excess grease on the chain, then that is absolutely going to attract dirt and gook and grime. I can understand the instinct of like, oh, well, I want it to be nice and lubricated, so I'm going to put a bunch of chain lube on it and leave it on there so it really works in. It's a problem because that ends up being sticky. It attracts extra dirt and grime, and it's not a good thing. You don't want the lube on the outside of the chain. You want it on the inside of the chain, in between those two links. So don't be afraid to put it on and then wipe it off, because the parts that you're wiping off are on the outside, not on the inside. Chain lube is not expensive. It doesn't take a lot to use. So there's a nice clean chain. Ooh, wow, it's so shiny. But yeah, exactly. So you see how smooth that one link moves and how not smooth the other link moves? Some are stiff and some are a little cleaner. So this is not a chain that's on a bicycle, obviously. Lube is not expensive. You can get specific chain lube from your local bike shop. I highly recommend just going in and saying hi. And pick up a bottle because it doesn't take much. An old shop rag. I know old T-shirts are popular to use for this purpose, but you're making sure that all the grease and grit is off of the chain, and the lubrication is just inside those chain links. If you can see a little bit of grease on there, that's fine. And we're not gonna go at it with a toothbrush or anything, but if it looks clean, then it's probably a good thing. I almost rhymed to that. That was close. A for air, B for brake, C for chain. And what else did I miss on the chain? Oh, I've got a question here in the chat. Sylvie, would you mind helping me with this one?
Go ahead.
It says, is there a different chain lube for wet versus dry environments? Interesting. So here in San Diego, the weather's fairly consistent, in that it's most of the time not raining, and when it is, no one leaves the house, so they don't have to worry about that. But Sylvie, if you were going to use a chain lube in a wet or a dry environment, is there a difference? Should you buy something different if that's the case?
Okay, this is definitely a yes and question. You can get by with using just like the cheapest basic lube all day long as you keep an eye on the chain, and keep it well lubed. With that said, you make waxed lubes. They make a whole bunch of types of lube. I think they even have a lube that has gold flecks in it, if that's the way you want to go. So it does make sense in some extreme conditions to get the chain lube that matches the conditions that you'll be in. So if you'll be biking in a place that is really dry, you're picking up a lot of like dust and sand, you don't want a lube that's going to be like sticky and collecting all that stuff. The opposite side of things, if you bike in a place that's, humid and wet all the time, you don't want a lube that's just going to get washed off immediately when you go out. So yeah, you basically choose the conditions you'll be in. And if you do have that much fluctuation in the conditions, get the lube that matches that. Get a wet lube if you live in a wet place. Get a dry lube if you live in a dry place.
So viscosity, is that the difference? Is it like thicker?
Yeah, to some extent. It's also what it's made out of. I mean, some will be basically waxed, and it'll just put this wax coating on that doesn't easily wash away the same way something, that's nice and viscous will.
Interesting. Cool. Thank you for that question, Jesse Clark. Thank you. Okay, so as far as chain goes, straight lines. It's easy to lube your own chain. Make sure the gears are smooth and don't sound super loud and crunchy. And also, play with those gears. If you do have a stand, great. If you can turn the bike upside down, that's great too. But practice getting the chain from the highest to the lowest gear when you're off the bike. Make sure that you're able to do that easily before you start riding. Because when you're halfway up the hill and you're really pushing to get that gear where you want it, it can be frustrating. So making sure that that's handled before you start is a great way to do it. A for air, B for brake, C for chain, crank, cassette, and cog. Quick stands for quick release. So there's a couple different quick releases on your bike, probably. One of the first places to look for it is on your front wheel. I like to make sure that that little lever is pointed backwards or up. That's something that people like to do, but that's not the most important part. The most important part is that it's nice and tight. If that quick release didn't exist, we'd just have 2 bolts and we'd use 2 wrenches to tighten it down. And that's all it would do. When you loosened up the bolts, then the wheel would just fall right out of the fork. And when you loosen the quick release, it does the same thing. That's because sometimes I like to be able to get the wheel off quickly. If I was out riding and I got a flat and I wanted to patch it or change the tube or whatever it is, I'd want to be able to get the tube off very quickly, or the tire off very quickly. But when I don't want the tire to come off very quickly, I want to make sure that that doesn't happen. And the way to do that is to make sure that the quick release is appropriately tight. So the best way that I know to do it is with the non-lever side, tighten it down almost all the way. If you tighten it down too far, then the lever action won't work. That lever action is designed to bring that last 10% of tightness. So once it's almost all the way tight, you can push the lever closed. If it is so easily that there's no resistance at all, that's a bad thing. If it closes so hard that it takes all of your might to close it, that's also probably a bad thing. You want it to leave an impression in your hand when you do push it closed. You push it, it's nice and tight, and there's that little impression image in the middle of your hand. That means that that's a good rule of thumb generally for it being about as tight as you want it to be. There's that little lever. Yep, right there. You can see quick on the front. You can see quick releases on the back. And you can sometimes see quick releases seat post as well. They're all designed to make it easy to make quick and easy adjustments. And again, those are good when you want to make quick and easy adjustments, and they're bad when you don't want to make quick and easy adjustments. No quick release on this bike for the seat. You'll need an Allen wrench to adjust that, which is fine. Just know that when you are buying a multi-tool or something, that you did have the Allen wrench size that would fit your seat post. So yeah, there's the little Allen wrench. Perfect. Quick releases, making sure they're pointed backwards. If they're adjusted improperly, you can have rubbing. If the wheel's out of true, if you've adjusted one side to be higher than the other, then that can sometimes cause a problem. It's usually more on the rear than front. If the quick release is loose on the back and you're very strong, then you'll notice the chain is only pulling on one side, and so it can pull the wheel out of alignment. That's something that exists. So making sure that quick release is nice and tight is definitely a good thing. A is for air, B is for brakes, C is for chain, crank, cassette, cog, and clothing. Quick is for quick release, and then check is for the final overall check of the bicycle. We saw this already, but I'll just mention it again. One of the first things to notice is that water bottle cage in the middle of that bike. If you do put a water bottle in that's not designed for that size, that's an easy thing to fall out. Something tiny, no good. So it stays a little bit, but then when you do the check of the bike is when it's going to fall out. So the way to check the overall bike and make sure everything is basically where it is and that it'll stay where it is one hand on the back of the saddle, one hand on the middle of the handlebars, lift the bike up as high as you're comfortable with, and let it drop on the ground. Don't let it fall over, but you're letting it drop. There's shaking. It's going to be loud. Good. You're hearing rattling. A little rattle is okay. There's parts that are supposed to move a little bit. The chain's going to move. You're looking for some bounce. You want it to bounce back, and that means that the tires are pumped up appropriately. And you're essentially, I think, a good way to think of it is establishing a baseline here. So you know what it's supposed to sound like when everything's working okay. And then when you are riding your bike and there's something that's rattling even more, you know that that's probably something that's different and that could be a problem. So the overall check of the bicycle is a great way to make sure basically everything's where it should be. If something is not where it should be, if something falls off of the bicycle, go get it and put it back on the bicycle. If you don't have a stand, another good way to check everything's working is just turning the bike upside down. This allows you to spin the wheels. This allows you to spin the chain. This allows you to, if you're flexible, check the brakes. And if you're going to lube the chain or anything like that, this is a great position to get the bike into if you don't have a stand. If you were looking to do more bike maintenance stuff, I would say absolutely look for not expensive, a used floor stand like Sylvia's showing us here. They're great, adjustable. They can heights and angles and all. If you're going to make YouTube videos about bike maintenance, then they're indispensable. So let me see. Oh, we had frequently asked questions. And so I've included some of those that we had previously. So let me just start at the top. So the first question I had was about the shocks on the bicycle. Now, not every bike has shocks, and certain shocks are going to work than others. I've seen shocks on the seat post. I've seen shocks on rear wheels. I've seen shocks on front wheels. And so those are going to vary. An example of the front shocks here, you go over the basics of adjusting those and knowing if they're right or wrong.
Well, this bike is a funny example because the shock is damaged. And I know that because when I put even some of my body weight on it, I can make the shock go almost all the way down. When I lift my weight off, kind of slowly comes back up, and it doesn't even come back all the way without me pulling it out. So I wouldn't suggest messing with shocks at home because they make so many types of shocks. They have so many specific tools to fix the specific types of shocks. This is the kind of thing you'll want to go to a mountain bike shop to do. Check in advance with the mechanics, see if they have the tools they need to fix the kind of shock that you have. It'll say someplace on the shock what make and model it is. One of the ways you can also tell that a shock is damaged, besides what I'm showing you with this one, that it's depressing all the way and not coming up fast, you might see that it's leaking in places. You might see kind of liquid, oil, even like dust and stuff collecting, maybe on the shock up the top, maybe someplace down at the bottom. You might also see the seals getting kind of corroded and breaking. So this should be all sealed up. If you see little like splits and kind of open seams on these little seals, that's a good indication that something on the shock is messed up and is going to need some attention. These should last a long time, but just like with anything else on the bike, without consistent kind of maintenance and checking in, a little bit of damage can become a big thing that can be pretty expensive if you don't kind of deal with it fast enough.
Well, that's a good transition to one of the other questions we had, which was, how do I know when it's time to replace a part versus fix a part? How do I know how long parts are supposed to last in general? And I think this is a pretty general question because obviously different parts get replaced at different times. But one of the things I like to remember is there are parts that will fail in tandem because they work together. So if you're at a bike shop and you hear it's probably time to replace part A, and they are saying, because you're replacing this part, you should probably replace these other parts as well. That's probably not because they're just trying to upsell you on something. It's because parts of the bike tend to wear in tandem. Sylvia's showing us, what's the name of that specific tool?
This is a chain checking tool.
Chain checking tool.
Yeah, a chain wearer tool, if you will. But I'm basically using this to see if my chain has essentially elongated. What'll happen is with time, the gaps between the chain links will get kind of chewed away by the cogs, the teeth on these cogs. Like Kevin was saying, sometimes these things will happen in tandem. So the cog is slowly eating away at the chain is slowly kind of eating away at the cog also. And so sometimes you do want to go in and replace both of those pieces and maybe even the chain rings all at the same time. You might not need to do them all at once. If you lube the chain consistently and you change it out when it's getting old, you can make the cogs and the chain ring last a long, long time, even with new chains. So this is a nice, inexpensive tool to have at home. The second way to just check and see if the chain is still in good condition is simply by shifting it up onto the biggest chain ring and giving it a little yank. It should be kind of tight in this position. If you can pull on it and you can pull it up so high that you can see the top teeth of the chain ring, that's usually a good indication that the chain has gotten a little bit too loose and needs to be swapped out with a new one.
And the other, since we're in that same area, if I said the word shark teeth in relation to that part of the bicycle, what would that mean to you?
So let's see if I can get this close enough that you can see. And this one might not have a good example, but the teeth can wear out in a lot of ways. They can get pointed. They can get this kind of hook shape to them. They can get snapped off and flattened almost. These don't look awful. You can see a little bit of kind of like squishing of the metal on some of them. Let's see, we'll pedal and see if anything else looks especially bad. Yeah, nothing is standing out in the kind of way that I'd want to be like, this is it. This is the thing that needs to get changed. You might not see consistency between the shape of all of the teeth. That's not a bad thing. The issue is when they've been kind of consistently damaged. So again, if you see a lot of pointed teeth, a lot of snapped off teeth, a lot of bent teeth, a lot of kind of hooked back teeth.
And I think the thing I remember being told to look for is like a non-uniformity. Like if they're worn on one side of the tooth and not on the other side. If it's not equal on either side, that's because it's gotten ground down and too far on one side. And it's definitely a time to replace the part.
I think something that can confuse people is, if you look at what's happening in the back on the cassette, and this might not be able to get totally in focus, sometimes they'll design these so that the teeth will specifically like pick up and move the chain. And that's one of these places that you won't see, a consistent shape on all of the teeth, and that's okay. That's intentional. So, don't look at this and notice that you have some lines on some cogs and some shapes that don't match. If you look close enough, you'll see that has a little bit of like a pattern to it. And so to some extent, that's intentional. That's not a sign that we have an issue with this cassette.
So that looked like a very shiny and clean part. And one of the other questions was just pretty straightforward. How do I clean my bicycle? You clean a car by spraying it with water and rubbing it with soap and then spraying it with water again. Cars are designed for that to happen because a lot of their parts are all internal and they're covered up, and the parts that you don't want to get wet are on the inside of the car. On the bicycle, this isn't always the case. So if you're dunking the bike into a pool and then taking the bike out and, calling it clean, that could be a problem. Getting the bike dry after you do get it wet is extremely important. And so then maybe the idea is don't get it wet in the first place. Use a dry rag, wiping off any dirt or grime. And if you are going to use something moist, we saw before those little wet wipes or something that people can use. And, you're probably not getting into the nooks and crannies of the rear gears every single time you're riding, all the cracks and crevices of the derailleur. But every once in a while you are, because that grime and gook and grease can, build up over time. And handling it before it becomes excessive is absolutely important. So a dry rag, maybe a little bit of some sort of cleaning solution like a simple green or something like that. But not, dish soap, not, shampoo, not anything crazy. Keeping the bike dry, but also cleaning the bike at the same time, I think is something I would look for. Spider webs, get rid of the spider webs. Otherwise it's embarrassing. Okay. And then this last one was, something is squeaking on my bike. That's a misspell. Something is squeaking on my bike. How do I find out what it is? So, obviously there's a bunch of ways to do all kinds of different things. Having the bike up, if you don't have a stand, having the bike upside down. I think the idea is you're simulating the things that the bike would do when you're riding, except for you're isolating them from each other. So removing variables, picking one thing, trying that out, picking something else, trying that out. So Sylvie's trying out the brakes right now. So you're spinning the wheel, trying out the brakes, see what happens. And listening for squeaking there. the parts of the bike that are supposed to move in one way aren't usually supposed to move in another way. So the pedals are supposed to rotate, but they're not supposed to move side to side. So we're shaking them side to side and seeing if they move outside of where the rest of the bike moves. So breaking the bike down, not in real life, but sort of as a way to look at the bike, breaking it down into its different parts and moving each one of those parts independent of another one will help to remove those variables. And so it's sometimes hard when you are physically on the bike and the squeaking is happening to figure out what specific part of the bike is doing the squeaking. So if you have it up on a stand or you have it upside down, you're doing those parts individually, and that can help.
What I'd also add is that sometimes the bike isn't going to feel the same way when you don't have weight on it. And so sometimes you'll be on the bike and it's making a specific sound. You take it to a bike shop, you put it on a stand, and it's not making the sound and they can't find it. And you think, am I going nuts? Is it actually making noise? So being able to kind of focus in on the place that you think you feel the issue happening, the place that you think the sound is coming out of, and noticing that it might only happen when you pedal uphill and only when like my left foot is down, you know? So a little bit of that is just like go out someplace on the bike if you haven't been able to assess it inside and find that squeak, and you know, just focus in on when exactly the sound is happening, because that'll help indicate to a mechanic why it's happening and which place is affected. You know, it's only when I bike downhill and I slow down using my left hand, that kind of thing.
I think that information is also super helpful, not only for yourself and what you're going to do to the bike, but then, yeah, as Sylvia was saying, when you do bring it into that bike shop, being able to cut out the guesswork and say, I know what the issue is, probably. I've done the research. I've, isolated the part, and I know that it's something to do with the drivetrain, or I know it's something to do with the front wheel, or whatever else it is. So knowing the vocabulary, knowing the parts of the bike that are supposed to work in the right way, and then being able to recognize when they're not working that way are all important things. Any final words, Sylvie?
Hakuna Matata.
Hakuna Matata to all. Happy Hakuna Matata. Bike month is happening. iCommuteSD.com/events/bike month. Thank you to SANDAG and iCommute. Check out Love to Ride. And thank you all for watching. We will see you virtually in the future, and maybe on the road in real life as well with a perfectly working bicycle. If you see Sylvie or I on the street, feel free to stop us and ask us for advice. We're happy to share. Cool. Thank you, guys. We will see you on the road.